Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first impromptu, somewhat informal collaboration of an AMA. This started as a comment thread on one of Chris Lukey's posts. We've got Chris Lukey from Manufacturing Happy Hour. So I think all of us have kind of seen the discussion around these tech layoffs lately, and those of us in the manufacturing industry are wondering, does this mean anything good for us? Can we get more people into our industry? We have labor shortages of all kinds, whether it's from the factory floor up to, highly skilled workers in IT and OT, controls engineers, right? We need all of them. And so these stories of layoffs in the tech industry seem like possibly good news for us. But there's a lot of, I think, confusion, maybe misconception about what tech workers are, what the tech industry is to those of us in the manufacturing. And then on the flip side, we hear from our friends over in the tech world, well, what really is manufacturing? We're not very good at publicizing ourselves outside of our own industry and how cool it is, the things that we do. And so we ended up in this little comment discussion. And unfortunately, we're missing our friend Carl Ferreira from Refine Labs, who sort of chimed in from his SaaS tech sales perspective. And he had some questions, but one of the things that he brought up was that manufacturing is kind of a black box to a lot of people in outside industries. So we thought, hey, let's take this conversation off the comments thread into a live where we can, kind of answer each other's questions, have a little conversation. My idea came about also because our friend Sean Dotson hosts a thing called Automation AMA. So I was like, I think we need an AMA on the topic. And then thankfully we have our friend Luke from Mac Tech who chimed in as well. He's in sales and marketing for a manufacturing company.
I'll let the dogs out.
We might get dogs, we might get kids, who knows? We are all here in the middle of our very busy
day. It's live, people. We can't control it.
Yep. So thank you for joining us. If you're here, please ask any questions that you like from any of us here or in general. And then we have a few things to discuss and talk about. Carl was unable to join because his kids are sick. So we understand that. I'm a parent of young kids. That happens. And so we wish our friend Carl the best. And I'm going to try to incorporate his comments and his questions, as well as Luke and Carl had a conversation offline before this. So Luke might be able to speak to some of Carl's questions and perspectives as it pertains to their conversation. So I would like to set the stage a little bit and then have everybody go around and introduce themselves, if that's okay. Yes, exactly. Keeping it real. That's how we roll over here. Hi, Mickey. Thanks for joining us. So what is exactly going on? We see a lot of headlines, right? So the numbers are this from an article I just read this morning. 160,000 people were laid off from these big tech companies last year. And this year, we're close to hitting 80K with layoffs in the last month. So we've had quite a bit, these big, well-publicized layoffs where people get emails at 3 a.m. saying their job is over, or they just can't get in with their badge the next day. Not exactly in line with the sort of image that the tech industry has given itself over the last few years of being full of perks and very friendly, and we're on a mission. In some cases, we're a family. No, it comes down to numbers. Right now, economy is starting to go soft. They've miscalculated some of their things. Some of them have spent millions, if not billions of dollars on ideas like the metaverse. And I think a lot of them are recalculating where they're spending their money, how they're spending their money. And they see these sort of mass layoffs as a way to reorganize. If you look at it in the whole, though, they're not actually laying off any more workers than they're hiring. The sector is not contracting. It is an adjustment, if anything. But what it does mean for us in other industries that have been struggling for people, that have been losing people to the tech industries for years, hiring has been on pace for the last 4 years or so in the tech industry, growing and growing and growing, and it's actually not stopping. But it's hurt a lot of the other industries that have not been able to offer comparable pay, comparable perks, these cultures that are really attractive, at least from the outside. And I think that this is a great opportunity for us now to use this event and sort of the insight into some of these ex-tech workers to show that, hey, maybe working in these tech industries isn't any better than some of these traditional industries, or there are opportunities in the traditional industries for you to come. And, that's kind of where I see, how can we take advantage of this, right? So like I mentioned, it's really not a huge dip. The US tech industry added employees for the 25th consecutive month in December. And the number of people in tech occupations was at a record high of about 6.5 million. And the unemployment rate in the tech occupation is only 1.8% compared to 3.5 in general. But those are also two different things, right? We have tech occupations, which could be working in any industry, and then the tech industry, which has people of all kinds of occupations, right? So one of the things I learned today was that, for instance, of some of the layoffs at Google, 30 people were in-house massage therapists. So not everybody getting laid off from tech companies is a software programmer or in any kind of tech occupation even. They've just been, lured into or had the opportunity to work in the tech industry. Apparently, actually 59% of tech occupations do not work in the tech industry. And the biggest and fastest growing industries for tech professionals are finance, manufacturing, and healthcare. So again, huge opportunity. I think we should all take the numbers in context, but it is definitely a worthwhile discussion to have. And what drew everybody to big tech over the last few years were the crazy perks and the really good pay. And those are, I think, the things that, are going to be a big part of how people exiting that industry look at opportunities in new industries. Can they at least come close to matching the pay I was getting? Or am I going to get some sort of perks, or what else do I get instead if the pay is going to be lower? So with that sort of setting the stage from my end, love to just go around. And for those of you that don't know all of us, I feel like it's a small community, so I often assume that everybody knows Sean or everybody knows Chris. But if you don't, let them take an opportunity to introduce themselves and where you can find them and their content as well. So Sean, I'll let you go.
Thanks, Nikki. I'm Sean Dodson. I was the founder of R&D Automation and the president for 18 years. Exited the company late last year. So I've been in the automation industry my entire career, pretty much. I've started a small little podcast, Automation AMA. We've got a couple episodes up, a couple that I'm still working on. I aspire to get my production values up to Chris's one day. But you can usually find me on LinkedIn giving my unsolicited advice and opinions pretty often. So that's my introduction. I'll let it go over to Chris, introduce himself.
Hey, thanks, Sean, and thank you, Nikki, for putting this together. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Chris Lukey. I host a podcast called Manufacturing Happy Hour. It's one of the top podcasts in our industry, and you can find it over on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your shows. And at the end of the day, I'm on a mission to help manufacturers tell their story authentically to an ideal audience of manufacturing leaders. So that's a bit about what I do. And I guess I'm the guy that started all this trouble by asking the question on LinkedIn last week. So everyone here offered great insights to that discussion thread, and I'm looking forward to sharing more of those and learning from the audience here today.
Thanks. Luke?
Apologies to start. My power went out while I was sitting here, so it popped back on. We have an ice storm in Texas, so hopefully it stays on. We had some grid problems a few years ago.
Yeah.
But my name is Luke Wittenbreaker. I'm the sales and marketing director for a industrial manufacturing company called MacTech. And I am not famous. This is probably the most famous I've been. I don't have a podcast or a show or anything, but I follow plenty of these guys. And Carl, who can't be here, I follow his content on LinkedIn and appreciate it. So I was just happy to jump in as kind of a mid-sized business person that's interested in sharing my opinion and trying to learn more about both the tech side and how we can cater to those people, because I think there's a ton of smart people out there that could make a world of difference in the manufacturing world, whether they like it or not.
Right. So can I ask a question? What mid-sized manufacturer, what exactly does your company do?
We sell industrial pipe cutting and field machining equipment. So anything that's done in a machine shop, we're an on-site company that takes those tools out to site and does the machining on site.
Very cool. Thanks. And I guess I should
portable machining.
Okay. Yeah, that helps. I really wasn't necessarily familiar with that, so I appreciate the education. This is one of the things I love about this little community. It's like you don't have to be famous to interact with any of us. I think we all find it funny to be calling ourselves famous or for anybody to call us that. But I appreciate it. We really are doing what we're doing because we're really passionate about it, and I really appreciate the fact that there's an audience for us that's willing to listen. And I guess I'll last but not least introduce myself. If you don't know me, my name is Nikki Gonzalez. I am both the co-host of a podcast called Automation Ladies with my co-host Ali G, who's a systems integrator. We're called Automation Ladies because we are two ladies that like to talk about automation, not because our show is only for ladies or that we only talk to ladies. We do talk to more ladies than some of the other shows because, hey, we're kind of the only place where we do that. But don't feel like if you're not a lady that it's not for you. That's not the point. And we're not a women in organization or some sort of, interest group. We're just a couple of women in industrial automation that are nerdy enough that we want to talk about it with each other and other people. You can find us on most podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, everywhere else. I actually just looked up our stats for the first time today. I was kind of excited. We got 1 review on iTunes. And it specifically said that as well. If you're not a lady, it's still for you. So I appreciate that. We also have a website. It's called automationladies.io. But because I'm a terrible tech person, it actually is down today. So I'll get it up online again.
Hey,
later.
Maybe we need to hire one of these tech people, who got laid off.
We also had some interesting challenges with this live thing. Most of us are not too used to that. And Sean made the suggestion we probably need one of these tech people to come help us. So I think there's opportunity all around for everybody to educate each other, work together, and for us to move forward faster together. I also work for a startup called QuoteBeam. So I actually work for a Silicon Valley tech company that is building a supply chain platform for the industrial automation industry, which is a fun intersection. I actually personally left the industrial automation industry in 2012 to go into software sales and to be in the tech industry. So I have a little bit of an insight as to what attracted me to do that. But yeah, so that's, I think, introductions for all of us. And I would like to start off with a question from Carl, who can't be here, but I think one of the things that kind of started the chat thread where we riffed off of this. Carl comes from the software industry. He's a software as a sales sort of industry veteran. And he actually had a question about manufacturing. He thought that manufacturers could really pick up some of these salespeople maybe that are used to doing software sales in the tech industry to really propel them forward in terms of growing their business. But is the manufacturing industry a place for them? I think most of them don't know. So he said education on manufacturing in general would be interesting. It seems like a black box to everybody that is outside of our industry. What is the day in the life of a manufacturing seller? This is so great. This is our community. So him and Luke started a conversation because guess what? Luke is in sales in the manufacturing industry. So Luke, could you tell us a little bit about how you would answer that question to somebody like Carl?
Yeah, and I wish Carl was here to riff off me a little bit, but I've got 3 kids, so I understand what it's like when 2 of them get sick at the same time.
Yeah.
But, I don't pretend to know everything there is about the software sales world either. So we talked for 30 or 45 minutes, and it was really eye-opening to me and maybe even a little eye-opening for him. But they weren't as far apart as we might have thought. I follow plenty of sales gurus on LinkedIn, and I hate that word. I shouldn't use guru. people posting content and talking about their strategy and what they do and tips and tricks and coaching techniques. And in that regard, selling things, selling software, selling cutting machines, it's everybody's talking about it's a people to people relationship driven, educate me on why I need this and find a prospect and make that relationship and make a sale. So in that regard, I don't view it as being much different than software as a service. But one of the big differences we did talk about is the feasibility and the easeability. I like to make up words. That's probably not one, but of doing demonstrations. So in his world, he's got to get a client on a live call like this and screen share and show him a demo. Whereas in not every industrial sales world, but in a lot of industrial sales worlds, our equipment is 500 pounds and you got to take it into someone's shop and find the right guy to show it to and show him how it works and get his hands on it and get his hands dirty. And that can be a big difference in the world of software sales and industrial sales, I think. And that's not that I speak for myself too, because there's companies that sell tool bits and screws and widgets and things like that. And there's companies that sell giant industrial CNC milling machines that take up, 300 square feet in your shop, and you're not going to demo that either. So my
now imagine
one is there's a way to bring kind of the digital world into the hands-on world that I think a lot of the SaaS people would have more perspective on, and a way to kind of change how we in the physical industrial world sell our product to customers and drive demonstrations and drive that kind of sales process.
Right on, Luke. Do you have something to add there, Sean?
Yeah, I was saying, you were talking about, dragging in a piece of equipment that's 500 pounds. Now imagine a complete cell that's 5,000 or even 15,000 pounds, right? And doesn't exist. So in the custom automation world where I come from, you're selling an idea, a concept. So imagine Carl walking in saying, hey, we could write you this software that could do this for you. People are going to be like, what? You don't already have a solution? Get out of here. So there's definitely some different skill sets because you're selling a solution. You're not selling a product, which I think in that world, they're kind of doing a little bit of both. They've got a product that they're trying to sell. You're trying to sell the solution, but they already have it figured out. Whereas in the industrial automation world, a lot of times it hasn't been done, or it has to be done in a slightly different way, but you have to be creative enough to figure out, oh yeah, we've done something like that before. We can adapt it or change it and be able to show the person, that is the solution. We were talking just before we went live here about marketing. Don't market the product itself. Just, don't sell that widget. Sell what does that widget do for you? How does it make you more profitable? How does it make your life easier? Things like that. So that's a skill set that goes across, I think, all industries in sales.
And that's something where I'm really interested in seeing where the tech world, or from talent from these large tech companies, may be able to bring something new to the manufacturing industry. Because I have a long history with Rockwell Automation. I've sold hardware, I've sold industrial software, I've sold services, right? And where I think at least I've seen a lot of strengths in, let's say, the SaaS sales world, whether it's industrial or not, those sales folks are really good at asking the right questions and having the conversation before you even need to demonstrate that 500 pound, that 5,000 pound piece of equipment, or before you even need to demonstrate that software, right? Mm-hmm. So where I'm really interested in seeing where the tech industry may be able to help and make an easy jump to the manufacturing industry is, can they start bringing in these outside perspectives and these competencies where I think particularly SaaS selling is a very streamlined sales process, right? How can you make that? How can you bring in that streamlined sales process into custom automation? Like you were saying, Sean, it's probably not going to be a one-to-one, but I'm sure there are things that we can be doing better. And that's really where whether someone was in sales at a tech company, whether they were in customer success as a tech company. Probably not the massage therapists you were talking about earlier, Nikki, but a lot of these people can not only bring their core skill set, but leadership and outside perspectives that I think can, at this point in time, we're always looking for people to bring the manufacturing world more into the 21st century, right? We're making good progress, but I'm hoping these people can be a catalyst to get us to go even faster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'll give a little bit of my perspective sort of. And I did jump into, I used to be a machine vision sales engineer. So unlike Sean, I mean, I wasn't building whole cells, but generally you can't sell a vision system unless you can solve the problem, because they are not general purpose, right? You have to have the right lenses, so I would generally have to take my equipment, order demo equipment, set it up on the line, test it out, make sure that it actually kicks out the bad part, and then I would make a sale. That's very different from something where you can do a canned demo and just show general features of something. But I lived in the Bay Area. So another thing about, this whole situation is, right, a lot of these workers are living in these very expensive cities because that's where these tech companies are. And so, the high pay is something that is necessary to be able to survive in those metros. Or just have, what you would consider to be a decent, middle class sort of house, car, kids, right? Afford your dog and whatnot. And so for me, the money was never a huge motivator until I realized, I looked at, the upper management in my companies and the people that I worked with. The ones that were secure were ones that, so when I was coming into the workforce, in 2008, I saw that those people that were set were ones that bought a house 20 years ago. I couldn't afford anything, in where I lived on the salary that I made. Even if I was the top salesperson, and there was an adjustment for the city I lived in versus living, somewhere in the Midwest. But that adjustment was nowhere near realistic for me to see myself being able to raise a family in the place that I was working. So I always assumed, okay, I'm going to work here for a few years while I'm young, and then I'm going to move back to Texas or somewhere else when I want to have kids, because it's completely unsustainable to be able to buy a house and have, what sort of the American dream life is. And you see that with the tech companies. Some people, I mean, shoot, they worked there for 3 years, lived in a box truck in the parking lot because it's a stepping stone for them, right? And then some people make a whole life of it, but that does require those higher pays to pay the mortgage in places like that. I think now there's a huge ability and an awakening to the fact that there's remote work, there's other markets, there's a lot of other places that are attractive to live. And so maybe the salaries don't have to be exactly what they've been in the tech world in order to have an enjoyable job, be able to provide for your family. You can do that on less in many other places in the world, or in the US even, than, let's say, the San Francisco Bay Area.
Mm-hmm.
So I can only speak to sales, and I'll bring in something that Carl and I talked about as well, because this kind of blew his mind, and I liked it. But he said, one of the black boxes of sales in the SaaS world to the industrial world is, can I go make as much, or how much money can I go make? And I said, most of our, to be completely open, most of our sales people start between 70 and 100K base, and they have a 5% override on paid invoices that is uncapped. And he was like, whoa, it's uncapped? And I said, yeah. And I said, thing that really blew his mind was that I told him that all of our sales reps for the life of a client get paid to manage an account and maintain a customer through the customer's life cycle. Because I might be speaking out of turn, but Carl was stating that, in the SaaS world, it's all about growth and rapid growth. You get paid, I think the term he used was new logos. So you get paid for new logos, and you stay on that account for a year as a commission structure or something, and then it drops off because you got to go keep growing and growing and growing. And I don't want this to come across as our company doesn't want to grow, because we do want to grow. But I think there's a lot of industrial companies out there like ours that started in the 1970s or before and have no debt, haven't had any layoffs, don't have a board of investors or the public market telling them to go cut this many heads. We're looking for good to sustainable growth, and our business is profitable, and we try to pay people well. And Carl asked how many hours it takes to do that as a salesperson. I said, I don't know for sure, 40 or 50. And I mean, guys are still answering the call at night every once in a while or on the weekend, because that's just how the industry works. But, paraphrasing Carl, he was like, man, that takes 60, 70, 80 hours a week in the San Francisco tech area. And he was like, that lifestyle mindset is something that's important too, whether it's sales or, like Chris was saying, the administrative function, or a finance person or a marketing person that wants to try a new industry.
So I think something I would add to this is one of the individuals, coincidentally enough, I'm actually writing a blog post on that thread I posted. So I just took all my notes yesterday. So I have a lot of these ideas fresh, and I was able to look at a lot of the excellent points people made in that conversation. And, when we're talking about compensation and hours worked, and hey, do companies even want to grow the same way a SaaS company would? Jason Zenger, one of the co-hosts of the Making Chips podcast, another great manufacturing podcast out there, he brought up the point that, hey, in manufacturing, kind of to what you were saying, Luke, there can be more stability, if you will, in terms of the business and your career. So when we're talking about compensation, right, we're not just talking about the money, we're talking about how can you sell the other benefits of your company, right? Is it sustainable lifestyle? Is it, it could be the money, right? I don't think that's out of the question at all, having seen what people have done in the manufacturing industry from a couple of different angles. But there's more than just this is how much you get paid and where you live, right? So I think there's a lot of other things that play into that. And I think Jason did a good job of bringing that into the conversation.
Yeah, that's a good point, Chris. Yeah, I've always said that it's so much easier to sell to an existing happy customer than it is to go find a new customer. In the industrial manufacturing world, I believe that's probably even true, honestly, in the software world. If you continue to get your customer to buy more seats, however. In their world, what they see that is, well, they're going to buy 1,000 seats to start, let's say, and then add 5% per year. That's not worth it to them to keep going after, where they can go sell another 1,000 seats at the next company. So I think it's the dollar value of the product too. They're also startups a lot of times. It's all about growth. It's all about proving how fast they can get into that market. Whereas to Luke's point, when I owned my company, there was times it's like, what? I don't care if the invoice hits this quarter or next quarter. It doesn't matter. It's going to hit. I'm not a public company. I don't have to get judged, quarter by quarter, month by month. Whereas a lot of these tech companies, are. I want to just spin back real quick to something you said before, Nikki, about the numbers. The numbers are up. People talk about, Microsoft laying off 10,000 people. They hired 40,000 last year. So they're still net 30 up. And as you said, not all of those are high-level programmers or sales and all that. There was a really interesting comment from TCI, is a big investor in Alphabet, Google. And after their 12,000 people lay off, their comment was good start. And they made the comment that the salaries are too high. Now to your point, Nikki, you lived it. I've been sorry, one of my tabs started playing music. I've been out to San Francisco and seen, the housing price. Never lived out there, but I've seen it before. It is a little crazy. But I think, when you're looking at bottom line, a $400,000 salary is a $400,000 salary. Now that $400,000 salary in San Francisco is much different than a $400,000 salary in Iowa or in Florida. So I think what some of these investors are starting to see is that, why can't we have more remote workers where we can maybe, I hate to say pay them less, because that's not really a fair thing, but we don't have to pay as much to live in that area. I have a really good friend who works for a very large tech company who just recently moved from California back to Florida. And even with a pay cut for the state adjustment, making more money just because of cost of living.
Yep.
So it was actually better for them to get away from the mothership. So, there's a lot of things I think that the tech industry needs to come to grips with. Manufacturing, we have not embraced remote as much as we should. And I'm going to just kind of spin that off because somebody asked a couple of those comments, and I'm a very big proponent of remote work. I think it works. So I'm going to kind of leave it at that and get everybody's opinion on how can manufacturing get better at remote work, and what can we learn from the tech industry's kind of short stint at going fully remote, and now they seem to be kind of be going back to not so much.
I think I've seen this firsthand. We went not fully remote because we have a manufacturing facility where we manufacture equipment, which is hard to do remotely when it requires the people and the machines to do it. But we during the COVID times went 80% remote and brought some back afterwards, and there has to be people in our shops. I think that makes it a little bit more difficult sometimes, and where I see internal jealousies of my own of companies I work with or software companies where they're like, we're going completely remote. And it's like, we could never do that, but we have kind of a hybrid model that works for us. And one thing that I don't know if this helps or hurts people in the tech industry that want to come this way, but one thing that I always keep in mind is I got to keep in mind the people in our organization that can't work remote, that have to show up every day. The person at the grocery store that has to be behind the counter and sell stuff and check people out, because it doesn't have to be fair for everybody, but you have to think about the different perspectives of people in your organization that can and can't get certain benefits and how you kind of share them with the whole organization.
I do think it, on the topic of remote work, obviously it depends on the role, especially in manufacturing. If you're making the widget, you gotta be present for that in some way, shape, or form. I think what I've learned is someone that really likes remote work and makes a priority around it. Not everyone is that same way. Also, like I've always, I have, to a fault, I think of, oh my gosh, everyone should want to work remotely. A lot of people like their routine of just being at home, knowing what restaurants to go to, knowing where to grocery shop, and living their life that way. So I do think there's it's part of it goes back to what are your priorities in life. I do agree, Sean, that there are a lot of opportunities for remote work. When you're talking about there's been a heavy focus on sales in this conversation because a number of us have that background. Customer success, another great role that can be done remotely, right? Like,
Yep.
I think what needs to happen, this is a bit of a world according to Chris answer, is you got to realistically look at what jobs can be done in person and what jobs need to be done in person and what jobs can be remote, right? Because what I've heard from numerous podcast guests is one of the best things about remote work is you can get the top talent for your team, right? You can get the best customer success person, even if they live in Maine. You can get the best salesperson, even if they live in San Diego. Like, I would look at it from that perspective, right? What roles need to be in person, but hey, let me take advantage of all these other roles that don't need to be in person. And when it comes back to the point of our conversation, how do we attract tech talent to that industry? Manufacturers probably need to have that mentality that, okay, this salesperson lives in this city, but if I'm going to hire her, I need to make sure I'm giving her the flexibility to live where she wants to, and go in with that mentality to really take advantage of that talent that is now on the street.
Yeah, I think one of Carl's questions on the LinkedIn post was, when opening the black box, do I have to show up to a stuffy office? And I took it personally.
I mean, there's a conception.
The
entire manufacturing industry is just outdated and stuffy and dirty and boring and old. And
well, people think smokestacks, right? That's what they think manufacturing. They think big smokestacks. And, they always tell people, it's like, Florida is actually a really big manufacturing state. It's just, it's not the smokestack manufacturing. It's medical devices and pharmaceuticals and aerospace and all that clean, quote unquote, manufacturing, right? I think going back to the remote just thing real quick is, manufacturing can never go fully remote. Of course not. During COVID, send home the programmers, send home the engineers, the assemblers and the CNC guys and all. Yeah, they still had to go into the office. However, what we got really creative afterwards was, well, when they needed to do training, or when they needed to do, help us, write procedures for the assembly, go home for a couple of days and work on it. Like, why do you have to be in a conference room writing up these procedures or taking training or anything like that? Go take it from home. So it allowed, Luke, kind of, you said, because there's a little bit of that, like, well, they can work from home. Why can't I? Well, they know why, because they've got to physically make the parts or assemble the machine. But it gave them that ability to, like, if there's a day you don't have to be here, but you can still get something done, then go ahead and do it from home. Yeah. So I think we could get more creative in our industry, to Chris's point as well.
I think you're absolutely right. And I'd like to chime in with something that I saw maybe yesterday or the day before. Our friend Ann Wyatt from Ann Wyatt Recruiting, she does a lot of recruiting and workforce development stuff for manufacturing industry. She did a large retention study for a big manufacturer client recently. And she posted about it, not full results or anything, but she said that culture was the biggest source of non-retention for these manufacturing, and these are like production floor employees. But she said, aside from pay, one of the things that these employees mostly cared about was they all had different things that matter to them, right? Depending on their time in their life, their families, different priorities. They just felt that management wasn't listening to their individual needs in any way. And they had all kinds of different varieties of reasons for, like, leaving the job. But one of the main points she said is, and somebody else made a really good point, if you can't have all of the checklist of things, the gym at the, whatever gives you the biggest perks, the best pay, all of these things, if you don't have $1 to invest or change any of those things about your company, the one thing you can do is get to know your employees. Because if you know what matters to them, and you're willing to be a little bit flexible instead of having some sort of blanket policy that affects everyone, and it disproportionately, impacts people, that maybe there's a simple solution to what matters the most to them at work. And maybe it doesn't cost you anything. Maybe it's just thinking a little bit more about individualizing some of the things about the job so that your people can have what matters most to them. And, like, for some of them, it's the flexibility to work from anywhere. And for some of them, it's just to make sure that they get home to pick up their kid after school every day in their local community. Yeah. And they have no interest in leaving or going anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, I think, a lot of the tech companies back in the heyday, they threw out some pretty amazing salaries and some amazing benefits. Let's just talk about the 30 massage therapists that you said, got laid off. There's all the stories, about all the free food and the slide at Google, and back in the heyday, that was the norm, to attract your top talent. And I think what these companies are finding is that, those extra benefits sometimes are a little too much, because let's be honest, in our industry, if you're getting a free lunch, if you're having a pizza truck show up once a month, that's usually pretty good. Could we get better? Yeah, we could probably get better, but I think maybe, the tech industry has gotten a little too far on some of these benefits, and they need to look back and say, we can get good talent not by just throwing benefits at them, which some of these are kind of fluffy benefits anyway, but we can get better talent by being a better company, right? Being more efficient, giving, more flexible time off. I think the biggest mistake that a lot of these companies are making is the whole, you have to come back to the office 3 or 4 days a week. Especially when you've got people who are programmers or database engineers or whatever, that they're like, I don't need to be in the office. I'll come back every now and then if I need to, right? But I don't need to be there. So I think they're hurting themselves that way a little bit.
Yeah, And we got to keep in mind a lot of these benefits were created pre-COVID, right? The nap room, the high-end cafeteria, like all these things were built for people coming in every day. And I think people need to adapt to the fact that the new perk is flexibility and the option because remote work doesn't just mean going to New Orleans every April because I hate the cold here that time of year in Milwaukee. It also means, like you said, Nikki, having the flexibility to go pick up your kids after school and, block that on your calendar the same way you'd block any other meeting that you'd have with someone. So, I think it's getting with the times, realizing what was created pre-2020 isn't necessarily the same perk now. And I think it goes back to that thinking about what is your overall compensation package, right? There are a lot of different things. And this is a no-brainer in some ways, but I think it's worth reminding folks, a good compensation package to one person could look completely different than a good one to someone else.
Yeah, it matters a lot to stages of life, right? Young employees, they care more about certain perks, and then people that are, having kind of in the middle of their career versus closer to retirement, they have a lot of what does a compensation mean to them, right? Early stage employees with no kids might want to take some equity and take a little more risk, whereas other people want, really good health benefits. So again, it matters who your employees are, what matters to them. I also want to say the whole, extravagant perk thing. I think that's also a facade that has crumbled a little bit for the tech companies, is that it was never designed to just, part of it was to attract talent, right? But the other part was to make sure that those workers would never have to go home. And the reality of these tech jobs is, the 80-hour weeks, because why would you even need to go home, right? It was you have free lunch here so you can get right back to work instead of you having to commute to go somewhere to lunch or whatever. And so on the face of it, they were all nice and happy, friendly perks. But in reality, it was very much, okay, now your entire life is here. So don't go home. Don't have a life. I also, so I want to I'll try to go back to some of these earlier questions, but David Turner, you make a good point. He's currently registered in 4 states because of remote workers. So there is, some different things to take into account when you say remote employment. But I do want to bring up another point, from the article that I read this morning in my own experience. More and more workers are not necessarily needing to be W-2. A ton of these laid off tech workers are actually starting their own businesses. The number of startups registered last year was at an all-time high. I think a lot of people are understanding that it doesn't, even as a company, even growing as a company, it doesn't have to be about your W-2 headcount. It's about your network of experts, who you can pull in on projects, who you can work with, partnering. And a lot more workers are, including myself, I'll say this, I prefer to be an independent contractor than a W-2 employee because I have a business myself. My husband has a business. There's various things that for us work better about independent, employment relationships. So I think that's a thing that's changing a lot as well. A lot of our employees overseas, for instance, there's a lot of perks in different places. And perks, again, it just depends on your situation. Some people really want that stability, that W-2 paycheck. They don't want to have to think about their own benefits, and, it makes taxes simpler. But a lot more people, I think, are finding themselves in a more entrepreneurial spot. And that does not mean that they don't want to work for you or they can't be on your team. I've heard this from various people in my network now recently. A lot more people are approaching them about working like an employee, but they want to they want to stay independent. And I think several years ago, there was a huge discussion around this, that companies were taking advantage of the 1099 to call people independent contractors, but really they should be employees. And these were like low-level, low-paid people that really are not running their own business and should not be paying self-employment taxes and things like that. And I think now the tables have turned on that a little bit. There's a lot more people that want that kind of relationship at will. And so you don't necessarily have to register as a W-2 employer in every state in order to have top talent want to work with you. You might just need to change your perspective a little bit of, what does top talent being on my team mean to me? Does it have to be a full-time W-2, handled by HR, the normal, hierarchy of employer-employee relationship? That's changing as well.
It is a pain. I mean, we had employees in 5 or 6 states, I think, total. And yeah, finance hated it. It's like, it's like, wait, we just hired somebody where? Now we have to go register with that state. And it's definitely a thing that you have to consider. You're right. I mean, a 1099 contractor can help solve those problems, but at the same time, not getting the healthcare benefit and not getting the other benefits that the W-2 employees get. There's a battle there, and our industry is not, I don't think, as quite as open unless you are somebody who is okay being a consultant, or a hired gun and kind of going around to those places. But trying to hire somebody who maybe has always been a W-2 employee as a 1099 is a little tougher.
There are a lot more new software solutions now to facilitate remote work, including giving the same type of benefits to that you give to W-2 employees to 1099. So again, a ton of new software solutions that manufacturing industry as options. Obviously, another one is insurance. So if anybody that you have that is contracted to, that is touching wiring at your customer site or dealing with machinery. And it may be different, right? Do your customer service people need the same level of insurance as your field installers? Probably not. So it doesn't necessarily mean, the whole company cannot consider any kind of remote talent. Again, I think you look at it on a slightly more individualized basis according to the job function.
So I want to go back to something I want to talk about, and I saw a question way earlier before. I apologize. I'm not going to be able to scroll back and get to it, but so let's look at, we talked about some of the sales aspects, but what about the technology aspects? What can those tech guys, again, we keep saying tech, we're all in the tech world, but when we say tech, I know somebody said, Nikki, why are you using quotes around tech? Well, it's to talk about their tech world versus our tech world, right? So, what can they help bring, to our industry? My argument, and Chris will know this being an ex-Rockwell guy, we are a slow industry to innovate and to adapt. We've been using the same kind of basic tools for a very long time. I'm one that has gotten some gruff from people, saying like, ladder logic just needs to go away. It's just, I mean, it'll never completely go away, but there's so much more powerful languages. It can do so much more. And of course, you've got some people who have very, very, strong opinions on that. That was the post. Thank you, Nikki. Yes, I love that. And I would even replace Fortran with ladder logic one day, not right now, but one day. So there's some amazing things we're doing with software nowadays, even web-based software. It's come so far. You can do so much. I mean, look at companies like Vincian. You can design machines in a web browser now. I mean, never would have thought it would be possible years ago. So I think our industry needs a kick in the ass, to be honest with you, when it comes to software and HMI design and just the way we do things. And I think a lot of the people in that industry could lend a lot of insight into how could we innovate faster. So I'm going to leave it at that and then let you guys chime in.
No, I just kind of piggybacking off that. I think you're talking about exactly what we think about daily. We have a mechanical engineer who's not a software engineer that's retiring, that's been with the company for 44 years. So some of that is the reason why people are stuck in their ways. They're stuck in the tools they're using. And we see that at power plants and refineries that we work with all over the country, that the decision makers are all changing. They're going from 50, 60-year-old guys that have been at their businesses for 30 years to young people that make decisions a lot differently. And I think that's where, again, I'm kind of folding back into sales or marketing because that's where my experience is. But that's where people from the tech world have a chance to come in and make a difference in our industry because they know how to sell to these people that aren't just, old school way was go play golf with somebody and send them a bottle of wine in the mail and you got your contract for years to come. But the new young guy that's coming in as a new engineer at the refinery down the road is getting on everybody's websites and shopping around and pulling quotes and getting educated. And really people talk about demand gen. That's what they're doing. They're going out trying to educate themselves on your product, and they don't want to talk to you or they don't want to meet you. They want to get their ducks in a row and then maybe meet or shoot them a text or get on whatever and show them a demo. And that's what they want. That's where their time is set. So it's interesting you talking about that, because I see a lot of correlation of the retirement group coming up and new younger decision makers.
Let's stick on this topic of engineers for a while that you brought up, Sean, right? Like you bring up an excellent point, right? We have a different way of doing things than that big tech world has a way of doing things. But I'm a degreed engineer from many years ago at this point, and one of the biggest things we were taught is how to solve problems, right? And how to learn. And I think one of the big points that was made in the thread that came out that this whole conversation is based on from a week ago was that, hey, manufacturers, if they're going to attract this talent, need to be prepared to invest in reskilling and retraining, right? Because if someone is trained up in different programming languages, right, they still have the ability to solve these problems, right? It's not going to be an overnight thing to go from one to the other, but I do think the opportunity is there. But maybe more importantly, to the point you were making, Sean, is that, hey, they're going to bring in new perspectives, right? I remember I too lived in the Bay Area for over 5 years, right? And people do want to, leverage Linux and Python, and automation controllers were starting to build in more of those capabilities, right? So I do think, there's a two-way street here, right? It's, hey, manufacturers, if you want to take advantage of this talent, be ready to invest in a little bit of retraining and reskilling. But at the same time, let's take some of those technical best practices from that world and figure out ways we can make our lives easier in manufacturing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think, and I'll speak from my perspective as well now at QuoteBeam. And Luke, thank you for priming that. The younger engineers coming in out of college, they don't know our industry yet. That's one thing that we found is like getting an engineering degree does not mean that you know anything necessarily about being on a plant floor or doing controls, right? Unless you've had a really good co-op or something. And a lot of our tech talent, and particularly in the automation, have kind of been born in the field, right? They come with the background of engineering of some sort, but then they learn from all the old school people that have kind of brought their tribal knowledge. They've learned on the equipment. But they come out of school right now with the ability to Google everything, the need for quick information. They want to self-service, right? So young people that go buy cars, most of them have already made a decision what they're buying before they walk onto the lot. They don't walk onto the lot and wait for the salesperson to, tell them what make and model they need. And so that whole thing has changed very much just by the generations, right? So people coming into these jobs, they have a lot of ideas already. They like to educate themselves. And I think that we can do a lot better job being prepared for them to be successful in our field, instead of just saying, well, this is how it's done, and this is how this guy does it, and we're just going to continue doing that. I think that's a part of the attitude and the sort of image that's also holding us back from attracting a lot of talent to, because yes, some of these industries may seem old school, but if we have these attitudes like, hey, you coming out, you've got some skills that you can teach us, and we on the back end will teach you all the field knowledge that you need. And those kind of things coming together, whether in some sort of formal programs or just talking about it more openly. Talk about the culture of your company more openly. And the fact that whatever skills these young people bring to your organization, even if they're not the hard technical skills you need on the job, they're actually valuable for you. And I'm not sure like trying to train software engineers to program PLCs is the right way to try to transition tech workers to our industry. But some of them really want to do hands-on stuff and they're stuck behind a computer. And some of them would rather never want to touch anything physical.
Yeah, and I think
we've got to, go ahead, Luke.
I was just going to say, you hit on a point that I wrote down before this meeting that it's important to realize is that we're sitting here trying to educate ourselves and educate people on both sides of two different industries. I think it's totally unrealistic to think that we're going to convert 100% to the other side. I think there's 5% of the people over here that might be happy and do a really outstanding job over here, and that's what we're fishing and seeking and wanting. But to think that every single person that's worked in the tech industry is going to be happy in the industrial world is kind of a pipe dream.
Right. Sean?
Yeah, I think one of our other challenges, though, too, is not just, the industrial automation industry could just decide that we're going to change, but we can't. We have customers that don't necessarily want to change. So we've got to educate our customers on why they may want to try new technologies or different technologies. Manufacturers typically are a conservative industry, conservative group. They don't want to try something new, be bleeding edge, because they've got to keep making products. They've got to keep pumping out widgets or tractors or whatever it happens to be. But we've got to show them that here are the advantages of maybe trying some of these new technologies. I can't tell you how many times I would get a spec from a large company and go through, and it would spec out a PLC that's been literally obsolete for 3, 4, 5 years, right? But that's still their standard. Guys, you're not even looking at your own specs. It's, you've got to at least keep up with the industry. And that's a company that Dare mentioned something about, well, what if we, wrote something in Python, or what if we did this? Would they be like, nope, it's got to be this model. I'm like, well, you can't get that model. Fine, whatever the newest model is, So we've got to educate manufacturers as an industry as well. And, there's some companies and some startups out there doing some interesting things, but again, we're slow to move. We are, I think the best way to explain it is that tech industry was really fast adopting new ideas. And our industry tends to be a lot slower to adopt those ideas. So that's probably, you may get some people coming from that industry that get a little frustrated. But maybe they can help pull us ahead as well too.
Well, I think I love seeing the opportunity of like a startup that's pairing a bunch of industry veterans, professionals that understand the business and the problem really, really well, with some tech people that can create something new to serve that problem, and doing it in a new way, like using web-based systems or the latest way of coding, or God forbid it's tapping into OpenAI's APIs, those sorts of things. Those, I think, also coming up with new companies that bridge the old with the new is another way that we can take advantage of this talent for our industry without trying to stick them into a job that's existed for 30 years already in our industry. I think that's not going to happen, and that's not going to be a favorable outcome for anybody. Being cognizant of time, we're almost up with our hour. We've got a few minutes left. Are there any last minute questions from the audience? And if anybody wants to repeat an earlier question that didn't get asked, please feel free to. It's a little bit hard to scroll up in all the comments now, but I appreciate everybody's chiming in here and interacting with us. But go ahead, Chris.
No. I have a few closing thoughts for if we're ready for them, but it's your show, Nikki. I'll have you continue to lead.
No, I think I didn't see any burning questions pop in.
I think we covered a lot of them, already.
Yeah.
And I've been taking notes, and just to maybe summarize some of the themes I've heard, right? If manufacturers want to win by taking advantage of this talent that's become available, it's creating compensation packages that make sense, right? It's not necessarily just based around the dollar amount. It's, being ready to innovate through outside perspective. Sean, that was a great point that you doubled down on earlier. At the same time, we as manufacturers need to be ready to reinvest in reskilling and training. And just so everyone out here doesn't think this has been a theoretical conversation today, there are people that have already started to take advantage of this as of late last year, right? The one example I have from Kevin Bowers shared that, hey, Boeing said, we're taking advantage of this software talent that just became available, right? Theirs is really a one-to-one example of, hey, we're taking software engineers over here and we're bringing software engineers over to our team. But their CEO, Dave Calhoun, said point blank, as we're seeing the rest of the industry soften considerably, we're going to take advantage of that to win. So everything we discussed today isn't just like, oh, who should do this first or how does it get done? there are already people out there, which I think is important to say, that if you are thinking of doing this as a manufacturer, it's time to jump on the horse now rather than waiting another month, another, 2 months, whatever it is, because big companies out there are already starting to take advantage.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that professional recapping. You're very good. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We really appreciate it. This will be available as a recording, these lives on LinkedIn that live forever. So I think anybody watching this, in the introductions, we all gave kind of ways that you can find us. We can also revisit these comments at some point. And please, engage in this conversation with your customers, your partners, your coworkers. Think about how you can, make some of these changes with the softening of the economy. It's, we'll have a slight recession from what we can see coming, through this year, maybe next year. This is exactly the time to take advantage of making some changes in your company to be more competitive going forward. So if any one of us can assist you, whether it's, throwing ideas around, answering your questions, connecting you to resources, contact us. I think all of us, want to do our share to help. So thank you very much for joining us, everybody, and see you next time.
Great.
Maybe we'll do this
Thanks,
again.
everybody.
Bye.